Layla Kaya lived in Berlin, a city that felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. At 25, she had already achieved much in life, but the true essence of living still eluded her. On the surface, she had everything one might need for a normal life: university, housing, a job, but inside, Layla felt an emptiness that books, lectures, and even relationships couldn't fill. She was born in Turkey but moved to Germany as a child to continue her education and find better opportunities. At university, she chose criminology, a field that drew her in with its dark side. Layla was always fascinated by the motivations of people who committed crimes. Why did some risk everything for their goals, while others avoided even the smallest infractions? From an early age, she had observed people, their actions, secrets, and fears. These observations opened up an intriguing world to her, but her interest remained theoretical. Layla constantly asked herself, what if I could experience those feelings myself? It wasn't mere curiosity, but an obsessive need to understand what lay beyond the law. As time passed, Layla increasingly felt out of place among ordinary people leading ordinary lives. She craved something more, something that would truly capture her interest and present a challenge. She was searching for an escape. And one day, while studying another criminal case, Layla made a decision that would change everything. She decided to become part of the game, but not as an observer. She began to consider the idea of testing her theories in real life, experiencing what it would be like to be on the other side of the law. She began researching how criminals choose their victims, what mistakes they make, and what it takes to avoid being caught. Day by day, the plan became clearer. Layla knew she had to act quickly and carefully, but she needed one more thing: she had to choose her first victim. In this process, there was no room for emotions or doubts, everything had to be perfectly calculated. Layla understood that she couldn't afford a single mistake on this path. The only question left was, who would be the right target for her experiment? Several days had passed since Layla finally decided that her research and theories could no longer remain purely theoretical. She was ready to begin the experiment, and now her task was to find a victim on whom she could test her ideas. Layla understood that choosing the right target was a crucial moment. She needed to find someone who wouldn't attract attention, who didn't have strong connections to others, and who lived in relative isolation. Layla's plan was simple: choose someone who would be easy to deal with without raising suspicion. It had to be a woman, possibly someone who didn't look for danger in her daily life. She should live alone, be closed off enough not to have witnesses, and not create complications if something went wrong. The most important factor was that the victim should work from home, so it would be easy to find her through various online platforms. For several days, Layla immersed herself in the world of online tutors. She researched different websites where people were looking for students and offering their services. Layla knew she needed to choose people whose profiles didn't stand out from the others. Those who were little known, who didn't have many reviews, and who didn't leave too many traces on the internet. This gave her confidence that the traces of her presence could be easily erased without leaving any clues. As she was reviewing the profiles, Layla paid special attention to those who offered private lessons at their own home. She sought people who had explicitly mentioned that they worked with students in a private setting. They should be individuals who didn't seek extra attention and didn't show too much of their personality. Layla tried to avoid picking people with active social media profiles or those who interacted a lot with others. She needed to avoid any risks involving outsiders. The process of choosing a victim took several days. Layla wasn't in a hurry, carefully reviewing each profile. She looked at not only the photos and personal details but also the information about qualifications. This was necessary so that if she decided to meet the person, there would be no questions about her request. Layla was determined; she couldn't afford to make a mistake at this stage. Finally, after several days, as she was reviewing another profile, Layla found exactly what she had been searching for. It was a 30-year-old woman, Katia Weber, a mathematics tutor who worked from home. At first glance, Katia's profile was simple and unremarkable. It only included a few details: her work experience, the offer of private lessons, and an email address for contact. There were no links to social media, no personal photos with detailed descriptions, or information about her life. Layla immediately felt that Katia was the person she had been searching for. Her profile contained nothing that would attract attention. Katia Weber seemed to be a solitary person, with no wide network of contacts, and that was what drew Layla in. She analyzed the information and concluded that this woman could be the perfect victim for her experiment. Katia didn't live in the city center, didn't have a large social circle, and her profile was so discreet that no one would likely remember her in case something went wrong. This was exactly what Layla needed: complete anonymity. Layla thought about it a little longer, then decided she needed to act quickly. She composed a message to send through the platform. In the message, Layla introduced herself as a student looking for math lessons, even though her knowledge of the subject was minimal. She didn't want her request to seem suspicious, so the message was simple and polite. She didn't include any unnecessary details, just a request to set up a meeting to discuss lessons. Layla knew that the first impression was crucial to the plan, and she couldn't afford to be either too persistent or too cold. A few hours later, Katia responded. She suggested meeting on one of the days next week. Layla quickly agreed. She made sure not to leave any questions or ask for additional information to avoid raising suspicion. For her, everything was perfectly planned. She just had one step left: the meeting. Now, it was all about the upcoming encounter. Layla waited for the day with a mix of excitement and determination. Every step had to be important, and she knew that if she made the slightest mistake, everything could fall apart. Inside, she already felt a growing confidence that her plan would succeed, but doubts about what would come next still lingered in her mind. Layla was ready. The day had come when everything was about to begin. Layla woke up early, breathing in the cold morning air that only heightened her anticipation. She meticulously checked all the details: the outfit she had chosen for the meeting, her documents, wallet, and phone. All this preparation was part of her plan, part of the control over the situation. Layla had always been someone who preferred to have everything under control. Every action had to be flawless, and she knew that today would be a pivotal moment. She booked a taxi and headed toward Katia's apartment. During the ride, her thoughts kept returning to the plan. She calmed herself, reminding herself that everything would go according to plan. In her mind, she had a clear picture of how she would behave, how she would observe every detail. Throughout the ride, it was difficult to shake off the excitement, but she tried to remain calm, not allowing herself to be carried away by nerves. When the taxi arrived at Katia's house, Layla took a deep breath and got out. At first glance, the neighborhood seemed quiet and peaceful, nothing that could raise suspicion. Katia's house was in an old building, with a regular front door, nothing that stood out. Nothing that could ruin her plan. Layla knocked on the door, and a moment later, it opened. Katia greeted her with a slight smile. She was the typical image of a tutor, friendly and welcoming, someone who didn't seem suspicious at all. Layla responded to the smile, but tried not to be overly friendly. Everything had to be restrained, so as not to raise any suspicions. "Hi, you must be Layla?" Katia asked, a bit surprised that Layla had arrived a little earlier than planned. "Come in, I'm ready." Layla nodded silently and stepped into the apartment. Everything was just as she had imagined. Katia invited her into the living room, where a table was covered with study materials and books. It seemed like a regular space for lessons, no luxuries, nothing that made it stand out. Layla felt her heart start to beat faster, but she tried to maintain control. The most important part of the plan was still ahead. Katia offered her to sit and begin discussing the topics Layla needed to study. Layla took the sheet of paper she had brought and started by saying that she wasn't sure about her math skills. She mentioned that she hoped the tutor could help her with the more difficult topics. However, while they were talking, Layla was carefully observing the apartment. She was trying to notice everything, which books were on the shelves, where the bedroom was located. Layla was evaluating every detail, though outwardly she continued having a calm and composed conversation. She was looking for any potential weak points, such as windows or doors, that could provide an easy exit if something went wrong. After a few minutes of conversation, Layla felt that it was time to take the next step. She carefully asked to use the bathroom, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Katia pointed her in the right direction, and Layla went to the bathroom, but in reality, she used the moment to do another check of the apartment. She made sure the bedroom door was slightly ajar, and the bag with textbooks was on the table in another room. Everything seemed in order. When Layla returned from the bathroom, she sat back down across from Katia. The conversation continued, but now Layla was no longer paying much attention. She was only thinking about the next step, what she had to do to complete the first stage. Layla checked that she had everything she needed at hand and casually mentioned that she would need a little more time to fully understand what to do with the tutor. The atmosphere was still relaxed, and Layla was slowly preparing for the next phase. At that moment, her thoughts became clearer. She knew the plan was nearing its completion, and her actions had to be precise. As the minutes passed, she noticed how Katia had relaxed and stopped paying such close attention to her behavior. It was the perfect moment. Layla decided it was time. She was ready to move on to the next step of this meticulously designed plan. Layla returned to her apartment, but peace was nowhere to be found. Her thoughts wouldn't leave her. What if someone found a suitcase in the woods? What if the police found traces and caught her? But she reassured herself, the taxi, no traces left behind, and the spot for the evidence were perfect. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for everything to go well. After cleaning up all traces in the apartment, Layla decided that there was only one thing left to do: dispose of the body. This was the final part of her plan, which she had prepared carefully. However, what happened after the murder didn't seem strange to her. Everything had been so planned, so controlled, that Layla was sure she wouldn't be caught. When she strangled Katia, it happened quickly, like a burst of anger. All her rage spilled out in that moment, and even though she knew what she'd done, Layla felt her own heart stop from the fear. It wasn't a premeditated murder, but rather a desire to get rid of someone who could reveal her intentions. Katia didn't resist, didn't scream. She didn't understand what was happening when Layla grabbed her. After Katia stopped breathing, Layla assessed the situation and quickly regained composure. She had already planned how to get rid of the body. Layla struggled to calm her nerves, knowing that each of her actions had to be flawless. She placed the body in the suitcase, carefully closed it, avoiding leaving any traces on the clothes, and headed for the exit. The suitcase was heavy, but her strength allowed her to manage it. She took a taxi, mentally reviewing the plan over and over. Everything she had left behind, the apartment, Katia, was carefully hidden, with no visible evidence. Yet, the fear still lingered. That suitcase with the body was at her side, and at any moment it could all come undone. When Layla arrived at the woods, she looked around, made sure no one was watching, and left the suitcase in the bushes. She didn't look back. It was done now, and all that was left was to wait for what would happen next. Layla returned to her home, but the unease wouldn't leave her. She tried to hide her emotions, but deep down she felt she had to be ready for any turn of events. The police didn't know who was behind Katia's disappearance yet, but Layla knew the moment when everything could unravel hadn't come yet. With every hour that passed, she grew more nervous, but on the outside everything seemed calm. However, a few hours later, Layla saw a news story on her phone: the police have found a suitcase with a body, investigation underway. Layla's heart tightened. She felt her confidence begin to fade. But there was no sense in being paralyzed by fear now. She had to keep going. It was then that Layla made a decision: she had to control the situation until the end, no matter what happened. I hope this translation meets your needs. Let me know if you need any adjustments. The next day, Layla was on edge. She felt that something could go wrong. Everything seemed too calm, and despite her confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. Time passed, but it seemed like the police weren't concerned about the suitcase found in the woods. Layla checked the news to see if there were any new details about the investigation. But there was nothing. No mention of her. This was reassuring, but at the same time, it made her uneasy. What if the police didn't care at all? And if they started an investigation, how long could it last? It wasn't until Layla decided to relax for a moment and try to forget about it that her phone rang. It was a number she didn't expect to see. She jumped, but immediately picked up the call, forcing herself to sound calm. "Layla?" said a male voice on the other end. "This is the police. We need to ask you a few questions." Layla's heart skipped a beat. She didn't immediately gather her thoughts. She didn't know how to act or what to say. How did they get her number? "I'm listening," she replied, trying to stay calm. "We found a suitcase in the woods. Inside it was the body of a woman. We're gathering information, and your name came up in the list of people she had been in contact with. Would you like to meet with us to give a statement?" Layla felt her jaw tighten. She almost forgot how to breathe. Her mind began to race, but she tried to hide her concern behind a calm mask. "Of course, I'm happy to help," she said, forcing herself to sound confident, even though inside she felt like everything was falling apart. She couldn't let the traces lead to her. The police had to think she was just a witness, not a suspect. Layla knew she had to play her part to the end. Pretend she didn't know anything. After all, she wasn't the killer, right? Soon, she arranged to meet the police at a local cafe. The wait felt unbearably long. Layla couldn't focus. Every sound outside the cafe made her jump. Did they really know something? Had everything been uncovered? When the police officers, 2 men in dark suits, walked into the cafe, Layla felt her heart stop for a second. She stood up and walked toward them with a smile, trying to appear normal. She couldn't be too tense or too relaxed. "Layla?" asked one of the officers. He was older, with wrinkles, but his gaze was intense. He knew how to read people. "Yes, I'm Layla," she replied, standing firm. "How can I help you?" "We need some of your time to ask you about your connection to the woman whose body was found in the woods. We know you had contact with her. How did you meet?" Layla began telling the story of how she found the woman through an app and asked for a meeting, not hiding anything, as if it were just a normal conversation. The police listened intently, without interrupting. However, she could feel their gazes becoming more and more wary. Layla tried to keep her emotions out of the conversation, but with every word, she felt dark thoughts creeping into her mind. "You said you met with her several times. Did she try to hide anything from you?" continued the second officer. Layla calmly answered, sticking to her version of events. She didn't know what had happened to that woman. She couldn't even know what would happen next, but she tried not to show her anxiety. That was all she could do. When the meeting was over, the officers thanked her for her cooperation and left Layla feeling confused. The sense of relief still hadn't come, because she knew this was just the beginning. But no matter how hard she tried, the fear was still with her. That feeling was constant and unbearably heavy. Someone might uncover the truth. Someone might see more in her than just a witness. Several days had passed since Layla met with the police at the cafe. She thought everything had gone perfectly. She had calmed down, confident that she had done everything to cover her tracks. But there's always an element of surprise in life, and this one she didn't expect. One morning, as Layla was preparing to go for a run, she received a call. The number on the screen was familiar. It was the police again. "Layla," said a man's voice on the other end, cold, "we've found something important. We need to talk to you." She felt the blood drain from her face. This was too soon. Layla tried to stay calm, but inside, everything was starting to fall apart. "I'm listening," she said, barely able to catch her breath. "We found traces at the crime scene that might lead to you. We'd like you to come down to the station for questioning. It's better not to delay." Layla felt her stomach tighten. What had they found? She didn't know, but she knew that if they found something, it was over. The game was up. An hour later, she was sitting in an interrogation room. The officers had a bag, and they opened it right in front of her. She felt her chest tighten. Inside the bag was her clothing, the very clothes she had taken from the crime scene. Those were the items they had found, and, worse yet, she saw her fingerprints on them. "What's this?" asked the same officer, his face expressionless. Layla fell silent. She knew they had uncovered everything. She couldn't hide anymore. "Do you have anything to say?" he continued, his voice firm, but not cruel. She sighed and slowly lowered her head. Her mind could no longer fight. The answer came out on its own. "I tried to cover everything up," she admitted, not lifting her gaze. "I didn't want this, but it became a part of me. I thought I could do it and get away with it, but I can't." The officers remained silent. They waited for her to continue. "It was like a game. I just wanted to understand what it meant. Why it was happening. I don't know how to explain it. I tried to be someone else," her voice trembled. "I just felt like I had to do something big." "And you did," the officer said, pointing directly to her crime. Layla felt emptiness fill her from within. Everything she had tried to hide was now laid out before her, under the cold light of the interrogation room. The guilt she hadn't been able to acknowledge before now rushed in. She realized she couldn't escape it anymore. The interrogation continued. The officers asked her in detail about each step she took. Layla answered, recounting her memories. The more she spoke, the lighter she felt. At some point, she realized that her time had come. She couldn't continue this life anymore. When the interrogation was over, the officers said that a trial awaited her. She stood up, leaving the room with an empty look. Thoughts swirled in her mind, but none of them were about what would happen next. Her fate had already been sealed. After the interrogation ended, the case against Layla quickly gained momentum. The investigation presented all the necessary evidence, and soon a trial was scheduled. Layla sat in the courtroom, tense, with a blank expression on her face, feeling as though each word from the prosecutor enveloped her. Her actions were carefully analyzed, and it soon became clear that she was not just a criminal but a person with deep psychological issues. The psychiatric examination conducted during the investigation revealed that Layla suffered from a personality disorder, characterized by impulsivity, emotional instability, and a lack of empathy. Experts pointed to her tendency to manipulate and her need for recognition, which explained her drive to commit the crime in order to feel she had done something great. The court found Layla guilty of murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment. Her actions were ruthless and cold, but psychologists determined that she could not fully comprehend the severity of her actions, as her mental state impaired her ability to understand the consequences. As a result, she was ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment in a prison hospital. At the time of the verdict, Layla remained calm, as usual. She showed no remorse or regret. Only on rare occasions, when her gaze became especially vacant, could one see that something more was going on in her mind, something she was unwilling to acknowledge. Psychologists who observed her in prison noted that Layla did not experience the typical feelings of guilt common in criminals. Instead, she tried to justify her actions, believing that she had created something great. She didn't see her guilt, rather, she saw only the unreachable goal she had been pursuing. During the months spent in prison, she underwent several therapy sessions, but her inner world remained closed off from everyone. Layla didn't want to change, and although attempts were made to help her, she continued to convince herself that her act wasn't an accident, but something she had to do. In the end, her psychological state remained complex, and for many, it served as confirmation that a person can commit terrible crimes without truly understanding their nature. The judicial system tried everything it could to correct her behavior, but perhaps time and treatment will never restore her capacity for true remorse.